My name is Narissa Mercer, and I thought the worst day of my life was the day my third IVF cycle failed. I was wrong. The worst day came 6 months later when my own sister sat on my husband's lap at my parents' 37th anniversary party, while my mother smiled and told 42 guests they looked like a more natural family than we ever would. Then she laughed about my failed IVF and said Elliot deserved a real family before it was too late. I couldn't even speak. But my husband stood up, pulled out his phone, and said something that froze every person in that backyard. 17 voicemails, and 4 of them used my mother's exact words. What none of them knew was that those recordings would expose a lie that started on the night of my embryo transfer and change everything I believed about my family. Chapter 1. The seat my sister thought was hers. My sister was sitting on my husband's lap when my mother raised her champagne glass and told 42 people that they looked more like a real family than Elliot and I ever would. It was Saturday, April 26th, 2025, in my parents' backyard on Tylersville Road in Westchester Township, Ohio. White rental chairs covered the lawn. Cream roses sat in glass vases beneath a wide canvas canopy. Members of Grace Covenant Methodist Church stood beside our relatives and neighbors, holding wine and cake plates, while everyone gathered for my parents' 37th anniversary photo. Brielle had worn cream because my mother asked her to. I had worn navy because my mother asked me not to. My sister crossed the grass with a folded card between 2 fingers. She placed it in front of Elliot before lowering herself onto his lap. "Save me a seat when you're ready." A few people laughed because that was what our family did when something cruel arrived dressed as a joke. My mother, Celeste Vale, lifted her glass higher. She said Brielle and Elliot looked natural together. Then she turned toward me and said I spent too many nights saving strangers at the hospital and too many mornings injecting hormones into a body that had already told me no 3 times. She said Elliot deserved a real family before it was too late. The laughter did not stop all at once. It broke apart around the yard. I stood up. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to press them against the table. I wanted to say something, but the words would not move past my chest. Elliot set down his glass. He stood, slowly forcing Brielle to slide off his lap. Then he reached into his pocket and took out his phone. 17 voicemails, Brielle. 4 of them use your mother's exact words. My sister's smile disappeared. My mother's glass stopped halfway to her mouth. 7 months earlier, I still believed the worst thing in my life was that my body had failed me. I met Elliot Mercer in October 2017 at the emergency department where I was finishing a long overnight shift. He had brought his mother in with chest pain that turned out to be severe reflux. While we waited for the final discharge paperwork, he kept filling her water cup and thanking every nurse who passed. When I left the hospital after sunrise, he asked if he could buy me coffee. We started dating early the next year and married in June 2019. Elliot taught American history at Ridgemont High School and helped coach football. I worked as a certified registered nurse anesthetist at Harborview Regional Medical Center in Cincinnati. With overtime, I made about $198,000 a year. Elliot made around $72,000, including his coaching stipend. My mother never let him forget the difference. At family dinners, she asked when he planned to carry more of the financial weight. She said it with a concerned smile, as though she were defending me. What she never counted was the coffee waiting after my night shifts, the dinner he reheated at 10 in the evening, the medication schedule he followed more carefully than I did, the way he never treated my salary like a threat. Elliot did not make our life possible by earning more than I did. He made it possible by making the house feel safe when I came home exhausted. We started IVF in 2022. The first cycle in May did not result in a pregnancy. The second cycle in August 2023 worked for 7 weeks. I miscarried between hospital shifts and finished the day because I had been trained my entire life to keep functioning when something inside me broke. Our third transfer took place on October 9th, 2024, at Hawthorne Reproductive Center in Blue Ash. The beta test at the end of the month was negative. By then, we had spent approximately $82,600 on medication retrievals, transfers, storage, and testing. The morning after the clinic called, I came home to find an index card beside my coffee. Third time. Whatever the result, I'm still here. Elliot had written it in blue ink. I placed the card in a drawer with our marriage certificate and the IVF paperwork. In our garage stood an oak high chair my father had bought after the first failed cycle. Gideon had carried it into our house and said we would need it one day. After the third cycle, I could not bring it into the kitchen. I could not throw it away either. That was the pattern of my life. I held on to things that hurt because letting them go felt too much like admitting they had never belonged to me. Brielle had always been the daughter who received the new dress. I received hers after she outgrew it. She got piano lessons. I got praised for being practical. When I was 12, my mother gave me a leather-bound Bible. Inside the cover, she wrote to the daughter who understands sacrifice. For years, I thought she had called me generous. At 35, I understood she had assigned me a position. I was the one who remembered birthdays, scheduled appointments, chose group gifts, solved catering problems, helped with church events, and cleaned up after Brielle's mistakes. My family did not use me because I was weak. They used me because I had spent my entire life proving I could survive it. In September 2024, Brielle began calling Elliot when I worked nights. At first, she said she was lonely after her divorce from Grant Dawson. Then she began telling him he deserved an easier life. She talked about how long he had waited to become a father. At family dinners, my mother seated Brielle beside him. Brielle touched his arm during prayers. She rested her hand on his shoulder when she reached for something. Elliot always moved away, but he did not tell me everything. Then his phone started vibrating on the kitchen counter. One morning I saw the name Raina. Fourth call that day. I asked who she was. Elliot said she was connected to something he was trying to verify. He said he needed records before he could explain. I heard the name of another woman and felt the floor beneath my marriage shift. 3 weeks before the anniversary party, my mother created a family group chat. Brielle and Elliot were placed at the main table. I was seated near the catering entrance because Celeste assumed I would handle anything that went wrong. The dress code was pastel. My mother sent me a private message saying navy made me look tired. She added that Brielle would be wearing cream. I wore navy. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I simply stopped asking permission. A few mornings later, Elliot left a black notebook open on the kitchen table. I did not intend to read it. Then I saw my transfer date. September 6th, first voicemail. October 9th, transfer night. Same wording from Celeste. Raina Hollowell, night shift. Do not confront without records. I closed the notebook and stood there with my hand resting on the cover. Elliot was not simply hiding a woman. He was investigating something that connected my sister, my mother, a nurse named Raina, and the night of my third embryo transfer. The final piece was in the desk drawer. A request for the complete embryology record from Hawthorne Reproductive Center. Elliot had submitted it almost 2 weeks earlier. When he came home, I placed the document on the kitchen counter. Why are you requesting my embryology records? He looked at the page, then at me. Because I don't think you were given the whole truth. I asked who Raina was. Someone who should never have known your transfer date. I opened his notebook again and pointed to October 9th. Elliot told me Brielle had left him a voicemail that night. She had mentioned the transfer. I had never told her the date or time. Only Elliot, the clinic, and I were supposed to know. That was when I understood the secret inside my marriage was not really about whether my husband had betrayed me. It began on the night I had gone home from Hawthorne, believing my own body had failed for the third time. Chapter 2. The family had already replaced me. I asked Elliot how long he had known Brielle was calling him. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, with both hands wrapped around a coffee he had not touched. He said the first voicemail came on September 6th, 2024. Brielle had sounded embarrassed. She said the divorce had left her lonely and that she missed having someone dependable to talk to. The next messages were different. She started mentioning my night shifts. She said I was too focused on work to notice what Elliot needed. She said a man who wanted children should not have to wait forever. In one message, she said our marriage seemed to be running on habit instead of love. Elliot told her to stop. He kept his replies short and never met her alone. Then, he noticed that Brielle was repeating things my mother had said only hours earlier. Celeste would tell him at dinner that I had become married to my job. Later that night, Brielle would leave a voicemail saying almost the same thing. My mother would ask whether he was prepared to give up fatherhood. Brielle would call the following morning
and say he still had time to choose a different future. Elliot started saving everything because he did not know whether Brielle was acting alone or following a plan. I looked at him across the table.
You did not have the right to decide which truths I was strong enough to hear. He lowered his eyes. I know. He did not tell me he had meant well. He did not ask me to understand. That helped, but it did not erase the fact that my husband had spent months collecting evidence about my own family while I blamed myself for feeling suspicious. He told me he still did not know exactly what Raina had done or why Brielle knew the date of my transfer. Gideon had found something else, but he wanted to give it to me privately after the anniversary speech. Elliot suggested we skip the party. The offer surprised me. Part of me wanted to stay home, lock the door, and let my family celebrate without the daughter they only remembered when something needed fixing. But not attending would have allowed Celeste to explain my absence before anyone asked me why I was gone. I told Elliot I would go. After the party, there would be no more secrets. If Brielle crossed another boundary, he would stop her immediately. He agreed. I chose to walk into that backyard. Whatever happened there, I was not going to be used as bait without knowing it. 2 days later, my father came over to repair a leaking faucet. Gideon had retired after 40 years as a plumber, but he still treated every loose fitting in my house like a personal insult. When he finished under the sink, he carried his toolbox into the garage instead of leaving through the front door. I followed him. He stopped beside the oak high chair. Dust had settled across the tray. One of the legs still carried a faint pencil mark from the day he assembled it after our first failed cycle. He ran his hand over the back rail. "Keep this," he said, "whatever happens." I asked whose side he was on. "Yours." I should have said that 30 years ago. He did not ask me to forgive him. He admitted he had seen the way Celeste treated Brielle and me. Every time he considered intervening, he told himself I was stronger. I could handle disappointment. Brielle needed more help. My strength had become his excuse. In March, Elliot had approached him after recognizing my mother's language in Brielle's messages. Gideon finally admitted he had seen emails open on the shared laptop at home. Celeste had contacted a family law firm in Cincinnati 9 times between September and March. She asked about separation timelines in Ohio. She asked how IVF debt might be divided during divorce. She asked how long one spouse could remain in the marital home after separation. She asked whether an affair could affect negotiations or public reputation. She asked when a family should be told. She wrote as though an affair already existed. It did not. Gideon photographed the messages he had already seen. He and Elliot agreed not to access anything else.
Elliot kept the voicemails sent directly to him. My father kept the photographs from the shared computer. That was the extent of their investigation. It was already more than I wanted to know. Brielle's divorce from Grant Dawson had been final for almost 2 years, but their parenting schedule remained a source of constant conflict. Their son Owen was 9. Their daughter Lila was 6. I knew Brielle changed weekends when it suited her. I knew she sometimes sent messages through Owen instead of speaking directly to Grant. I did not know she had begun telling the children about Elliot. Owen had started asking whether our house had enough bedrooms. He wanted to know if Elliot would still coach football if he became part of their family. Each time I asked where the questions came from, he shrugged and changed the subject. Helena Dawson Grant's mother had warned Brielle not to involve the children in adult problems. Brielle said Helena was trying to control her. 5 days before the party, Brielle called Elliot and asked to borrow his car. Hers was supposedly at the repair shop. He drove to her townhouse and handed her the keys on the front step. She placed her hand over his and did not let go. If things were different, you know I would have chosen you. They are not different. Nerissa is my wife. When Elliot came home, he wrote down the exchange and emailed Reverend Elias Whitcomb. Brielle is escalating. Celeste is encouraging it. Elias replied that Elliot should preserve what he had and avoid confronting anyone through the church without evidence. He also warned him not to disclose my medical information publicly. Elias was not yet taking sides. He was trying to keep the church from becoming a courtroom. My Aunt Maribel called the next afternoon. She asked whether Celeste had ever said Brielle deserved a fair chance at the life I had. I asked what she meant. Maribel told me that after my wedding, my mother had said at least one of her daughters had gotten life right. Maribel had asked which daughter she meant. Celeste never answered. My aunt said the favoritism had begun long before Elliot. He was simply the newest thing my mother believed Brielle deserved more than I did. She stopped before telling me why. I could hear that there was another truth behind her silence, but I was tired of forcing information out of people who claimed they were protecting me. The week before the anniversary, Celeste sent me a list. I was supposed to confirm the florist, call the caterer, bring Gideon's heart medication, check the cake delivery, and arrange Reverend Elias's seat. Brielle had one responsibility: wear cream and arrive before the photographs. I told my mother the caterer had been paid to manage the food, and I would not supervise them. She replied that I had always been the one she could count on. For the first time, I understood what she meant. I was the person she could use without asking. The night before the party, Gideon came to our house with a folded gray cloth. He draped it over the high chair in the garage. Tomorrow, do not let her tell you what your life means. After he left, Elliot asked once more whether I wanted to stay home. I told him that if my family was preparing to tell a story about my life, I intended to be present when they told it.
He promised Betrayal would not touch him again. He promised he would not hide another piece of evidence. He promised he would speak if Celeste crossed the line. We arrived at the party at 3:30 the next afternoon. My mother looked at my navy dress and sighed. Betrayal was already wearing cream. She wrapped both arms around Elliot and held him longer than a normal greeting required. Kendra Sloan sat near the catering entrance with her purse clutched in both hands. Reverend Elias quietly told me he had heard rumors that my marriage was ending, but no one would tell him where they started. Then Owen ran across the lawn and hugged my waist. Mom says we might live at your house after everything gets fixed. I crouched beside him. What does everything mean? He looked toward Betrayal. She said, Uncle Elliot will understand soon. Betrayal called his name sharply. Owen ran back to her. I looked at Elliot. He was not surprised that my sister wanted him. He was shocked that she had already promised her children my home. This was no longer a woman testing the boundaries of my marriage. Betrayal had started living inside a future where I had already been removed from it. Chapter 3, 17. Voicemails. By 4:30, my mother had already found 3 reasons to send me away from the table. The florist had delivered one arrangement with pale yellow roses instead of cream. The wooden cake stand tilted slightly toward the porch. One of the women from fellowship could not find her place card. Each time Celeste looked at me. The caterer can handle it, I said. Her expression tightened. You know how particular people are. That is why you hired professionals. She stared at me as if I had insulted her in front of the entire church. For most of my life, my usefulness had been the price of admission to family events. I arrived early, stayed late, fixed what other people ignored, and smiled when no one thanked me. That afternoon, I remained in my chair. A woman from the fellowship named Patricia leaned toward me and rested her hand on my wrist. We have all been praying that you find peace with God's plan. I looked down at her hand. What exactly did my mother tell you? Patricia pulled back. Only that you have been through a difficult season. The answer told me enough. My medical history had already become fellowship conversation, softened into prayer requests, so no one had to call it gossip. At 5 o'clock, Celeste stood beside the anniversary cake. She thanked everyone for celebrating 37 years of marriage, faith, sacrifice, and family. She spoke beautifully. My mother had always known how to make control sound like devotion. When she finished, Gideon rose from his chair. He did not bring notes. I have been a husband for 37 years and a father for almost 39, he said. It took me too long to understand that keeping a room quiet is not the same as protecting the truth inside it. For 1 second, no one moved. Celeste turned toward him. Thank you, Gideon. Now let's gather for the family photograph. Her voice was light, but her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass.
People began moving chairs and collecting children. I stayed near the edge of the group. Brielle approached Elliot with a folded card. She placed it on the table in front of him. "Save me a seat when you're ready." Then she laughed and lowered herself onto his lap. Raymond Vale raised his whine. Well, at least Elliot would still be in the family. Several people laughed.
Elliot's hands remained at his sides. He did not touch Brielle. Before he could stand, Celeste lifted her champagne glass. "They do look natural together," she said. The laughter grew louder. Then she turned toward me. "Nerissa spends her nights saving strangers, and her mornings injecting hormones into a body that has already told her no 3 times. Elliot deserves a real family before it is too late." The yard went still in pieces. Someone near the porch laughed once, then stopped. Mira Ellison placed her glass on the table. I stood, but my legs felt detached from the rest of me. I could hear my pulse in my ears. Elliot set down his drink. He rose slowly, and Brielle slid from his lap. He pulled out his phone. 17 voicemails since September, he said. 4 of them repeat phrases Celeste used only minutes earlier. Brielle blinked. "I was checking on you. You called when Nerissa worked nights. You told me she had already given up on our marriage. You said your mother agreed." Celeste stepped forward. "You are humiliating my daughter." Elliot looked at her. "No. You made my wife's medical history entertainment." A murmur moved through the yard. Brielle crossed her arms. "You are twisting everything." Elliot looked at his screen. September 6th, November 22nd, October 9th, 2024. My transfer date. He did not play the messages. He only read the dates. On October 9th, Brielle mentioned Nerissa's transfer before midnight. Nerissa never told her when it was happening. Brielle turned toward Celeste. "Mom must have told me." My mother's answer came too quickly. "I did not know the time." Brielle's face changed. For the first time, they were no longer telling the same story. Gideon stood and lifted a manila envelope from the empty chair beside him. He walked across the grass and placed it in my hands. It was heavier than paper should have felt. I should have stopped this before they needed a party to finish it. Celeste stared at him. "What have you done?" He turned toward her. "What I should have done when Nerissa was 12. Inside the envelope were 47 pages. I saw printed emails, dates highlighted in yellow, screenshots, and a photograph of 2 teenage girls at a high school dance. One of them was Brielle. The other name written beneath the photograph was Raina Hollowell. I closed the envelope. I would not read my life in front of people holding cake forks. Mira Ellison picked up her purse. Celeste, that was not a joke. She walked toward the side gate. 2 other women lowered their eyes. Raymond muttered that everyone was overreacting. A cousin near the canopy said, "We should not destroy an anniversary over something said in poor taste." Reverend Elias stepped between the tables. "Please stop recording," he said. "No one should share Nerissa's medical information or any video connected to it." A few phones disappeared, not all of them. Celeste moved closer to the center of the yard. Elliot has manipulated her. Gideon has not been himself for months. Brielle made a joke, and Nerissa is understandably sensitive after what she has been through. She was rebuilding the room while we were still standing inside the wreckage. I looked at Elliot. "Take me home," he nodded. Gideon followed us. Brielle took 2 steps forward. "Nerissa, wait!" Celeste said her name sharply. Brielle stopped. Near the porch, Owen stood, holding Lila's hand. He looked from his mother to me, trying to understand why the future she had promised him had suddenly become something adults were afraid to name. I carried the envelope to the car. Elliot drove. Gideon sat in the back seat. No one spoke until we reached our kitchen. I laid the pages across the table. The first 9 were photographs of emails Celeste had sent to a Cincinnati family law firm. She asked about separation timelines, who could remain in a marital home, how IVF debt might be divided, and whether an affair could influence negotiations or family reputation. She wrote as if Elliot had already betrayed me. She had prepared the consequences before creating the cause. Another page held a timeline beginning in September. Brielle's calls, my work schedule, the night of my embryo transfer, the day Elliot requested records. Then I reached the photograph. Brielle and Raina stood together at their 2005 high school prom, arms linked, smiling into the camera. Gideon sat across from me. I recognized her at a church event in January. I did not know what she had done. I only knew Brielle still spoke to her. I turned to Elliot. "When did you start believing this was more than Brielle chasing you?" "November." "And you contacted Raina?" He nodded. I asked why her name appeared in the nursing documentation and how Brielle knew your transfer date. She would not answer. Then she called several times and told me to stop asking questions. Those were the calls I had seen. The woman I thought he might be hiding had been trying to make him stop looking. I folded my hands on the table. "You did not cheat on me, but you let me live inside a story everyone else had already read." His face tightened. "I thought I was protecting you until I had something solid. You were deciding for me." "Yes." No excuse followed. I pushed back my chair. "I want your phone, the notebook, every email, every password, and every record." He placed his phone on the table. "You can have all of it." "That is not permission. It is what should have happened months ago." "I know." That night I asked him to sleep in the guest room. not because I believed he had chosen Brielle, because I needed one room in my house that did not contain a secret. The next morning I called Maeve O'Connell. She met me at our kitchen table with her laptop and read through the records Elliot had requested. She stopped at an electronic entry made after the transfer. This was edited later. We checked the access trail. Raina Hollowell's name appeared, even though she was not part of the embryology team. A witness entry had been recorded after the procedure instead of during it. I called Hawthorne Reproductive Center. Nadia Flores from Patient Relations listened while I requested preservation of the audit trail badge access records, chain of custody documentation, and communication logs. It may be a documentation inconsistency, she said. Then preserve every record before anyone decides to correct it. The line went quiet. After several seconds, Nadia said the compliance officer would contact me directly. For the first time since the third transfer failed, the clinic understood that I was no longer calling as a grieving patient, asking to be reassured. I was asking them to protect evidence. Chapter 4. What they did to my marriage wasn't the worst part. Miles Harper called before noon. He introduced himself as Hawthorne Reproductive Center's compliance officer and spoke in the careful tone people use when every word has already been reviewed by legal counsel. This appears to be a documentation inconsistency. I stood at my kitchen counter with Elliot's notebook open beside me. A nurse outside the embryology team appears in the access trail. We have not confirmed any impact on your treatment outcome. A witness entry was recorded late. That may be an internal personnel issue. I wrote down every phrase. Then I asked for the complete audit trail, badge access records, chain of custody documentation, staff roster for October 9th, and written confirmation that none of the original data would be altered. Miles paused. We can arrange an independent chart review. I want that in writing. We may also be able to discuss a partial reimbursement for the third cycle and preserve a treatment credit for future care. He sent an agreement that afternoon. The confidentiality language appeared on page 4. I did not sign it. Instead, I called Martin Keene, an attorney in Cincinnati, who handled medical malpractice and healthcare compliance cases. Martin reviewed the documents and told me I did not have to decide immediately whether to sue. The clinic has duties that do not depend on what you choose, he said. If there is evidence of professional misconduct, they may have to report it to the Ohio Board of Nursing. A prosecutor may also act independently. So, I cannot promise my family that this stays private. You should not promise anyone anything. You should preserve your rights and avoid making public claims that the records cannot yet support. I had spent most of my life mistaking restraint for surrender. Martin made the difference clear. Not seeking revenge did not require me to abandon accountability. I returned to Harborview 2 days later. During pre-operative preparation, a nurse mentioned chain of custody while labeling a blood sample. For several seconds, I stopped hearing the rest of the room. The monitor continued beeping. The anesthesiologist asked me a question, and I realized I had not processed it. I stepped back. I need someone to take this case. The words felt like a failure, but leaving before I made a mistake was not failure. It was judgment. Maeve found me in the locker room. I had removed one glove. The other was still on my hand because my fingers would not complete the motion. She sat beside me. "You did the right thing." I froze. "You noticed, and you stepped out." I stared at the glove. I do not know how to trust a medical record anymore. Maeve helped me contact occupational health. I reduced my shifts and began seeing a counselor who worked with medical trauma. For the next 2 weeks, I avoided the hallway that passed the maternity floor. I washed my hands long after the soap was gone. I kept the Hawthorne folder inside a cabinet because touching it made my chest tighten. On May 12th, the clinic placed Raina Hollowell on administrative leave. Tessa Rowan, the embryology lab supervisor, participated in the independent review. The findings came in pieces. A double witness entry had been entered after the procedure instead of during it. Raina's badge had been used in the lab corridor, even though she had no assigned duties there. A documentation field was changed the following morning. Luis Mendoza, a night custodian, remembered seeing Raina leaving the supply area while the embryologist was elsewhere. The records also showed that a sealed unit of transfer medium had been accessed outside the documented workflow. No one said those facts proved the intervention caused the failed cycle. They did prove that the integrity of the procedure had been compromised. While Hawthorne investigated, my mother built a different version of the story. Celeste called members of the Women's Fellowship and told them I had become unstable after IVF. She said Elliot was turning me against my family. She said Gideon had been confused for months, and the anniversary incident had been a joke, misunderstood by a grieving woman. She used the fellowship mailing list to ask everyone to pray rather than judge. The messages began arriving. Be the bigger person. Do not let your mother lose everything over one mistake. Family is family. One woman invited me to a reconciliation meeting and explained that everyone would be asked to forgive before discussing details. I declined. Forgiveness before truth was not reconciliation. It was another form of silence. Kendra Sloan asked to meet me at a diner near Harborview. She was already crying when I arrived. Your mother put me beside you on purpose. I sat across from her. What did she ask you to do? Keep you calm. Take you inside if you started making a scene. She said your marriage had been ending for months, and Brielle was helping Elliot accept it. Kendra pressed a napkin against her eyes. I believed her. She wrote down what Celeste had told her and signed the statement. Then she looked at me as if she needed permission to stop feeling guilty. Thank you for telling the truth before asking me to make you feel better about believing the lie. She lowered her eyes. I understand. Aunt Maribel called that evening. She told me the secret Celeste had protected for almost 4 decades. My mother had become pregnant with Brielle before her wedding to Gideon. Maribel did not describe Brielle as a mistake. She did not describe the pregnancy as shameful.
She said Celeste had spent her adult life terrified that the church community would learn her marriage had not begun in the perfect order she claimed. She turned Brielle into proof that her beginning had produced something flawless. I became the daughter expected to step aside whenever that perfection was threatened. The secret did not excuse my mother. It explained the architecture of the house she had built around us. Does Brielle know?
No, Maribel said. Gideon plans to tell her. She deserves to know the truth about herself. I met my father at the house on Tylersville Road. Celeste was staying somewhere else. The anniversary flowers were dying in their vases. Gideon sat at the kitchen table with both hands around a coffee mug. I saw what she did to you, he said. I kept telling myself you were stronger. You used my strength as permission. Yes. He did not look away. You did not build the whole system, but you made it safe for her to keep using it. I know. He had rented a cottage near Loveland and planned to move at the beginning of June. He did not ask me to repair his marriage. He did not ask whether I forgave him. That was the first responsible thing he had done, without expecting me to make it easier. A few days later, Helena Dawson called. Grant had been preparing a request to modify the temporary parenting arrangement before the anniversary party. The filing concerned Brielle changing schedules, using Owen to carry messages, telling the children that Elliot would become part of their family, and asking Owen to keep secrets from his father. The video is not the case, Helena said. It is only one more piece. Grant does not need anything from me. No. If the court asks, tell the truth. I will not use Owen and Lila to punish Brielle. I know. But I will not lie to protect her either. That is all anyone should ask. Elliot and I began counseling the following week. He sat beside me, not close enough to touch. I thought complete evidence would make the truth easier for you. It made me receive everything at once. I know. He took a breath. I do not want credit for not cheating. That was the minimum. I took away your right to know and your right to decide. I had expected him to defend his intentions. He did not. We agreed there would be no more private investigations. Martin and I would make the legal decisions. Elliot would stand beside me, not in front of me. I did not tell him I had forgiven him. I told him he could return to our bedroom. At the end of May, Martin called with another finding. 6 months before my transfer, a staff member had reported that Raina altered charting after hours and entered areas outside her assigned duties. Miles Harper had treated it as a training issue because the clinic was understaffed. Hawthorne had not created Brielle's plan. It had ignored the warning that made the plan easier. Martin had one more update. Raina's attorney confirmed she and Brielle communicated before your transfer. What did Brielle ask her to do? They are not disclosing that yet. Has Raina admitted interfering? Not fully. The Board of Nursing has the file. Do not discuss the details publicly. I ended the call and stood in my kitchen with the phone still in my hand. Then someone knocked. Through the glass beside the front door, I saw Celeste holding a casserole dish covered in foil. She looked like a mother arriving to comfort her daughter. When I did not open the door, she raised her voice. We need to handle this inside the family before you destroy everything. I stood behind the lock and looked at the woman who had taught me that love meant making myself useful, quiet, and easy to sacrifice. For the first time, I did not open the door to let her in. Chapter 5. The life they could no longer define. Celeste stayed on the porch and spoke through the glass. She said Gideon would lose his marriage if I continued. Brielle could lose the right to live with her children. Grace Covenant would divide into sides. Our family would never recover. She said she had never ordered anyone to sabotage my IVF treatment. She had only wanted me to release Elliot from a marriage that was no longer fair to him. I kept one hand on the deadbolt. Did you know Brielle contacted Raina? My mother looked toward the street. I knew she was trying to help everyone move forward. It was not a criminal confession. It was something more familiar from Celeste. An admission wrapped in language soft enough for her to deny later. You have 30 seconds to leave my porch. Her face hardened. Family is family. Family is not unlimited access. I told her Elliot and I would not accept calls or uninvited visits. If communication became necessary, she could put it in writing. Then I closed the curtain. A week later, Reverend Elias called. The church board had confirmed that Celeste used the official Women's Fellowship mailing list to spread claims about my marriage and mental state. They arranged a voluntary listening session for fellowship members in early June. It was not a worship service. It was not a trial. The stated purpose was to correct false information and review whether Celeste could continue in leadership. Elias asked me not to disclose medical records that were still under investigation. He asked me not to demand that the church reach a legal conclusion. I agreed. I did not need the church to convict my mother. I needed them to stop helping her rewrite me. Between 70 and 80 people attended. Celeste sat in the second row. Brielle chose a chair near the back door. Gideon, Maribel, Maeve, and Elliot sat near the front. Some people nodded when I entered. Others looked away. I wore charcoal gray. Not navy, not cream. Nothing chosen in response to either my mother or my sister. Before I walked forward, Elliot touched my hand. Do you want me to speak? No. Stand beside me. Do not speak for me. He nodded and let go. I stood before the room and explained that my family had used the church to create a false story about my marriage. Brielle had left Elliot 17 voicemails between September and April. Celeste knew about the calls and encouraged them. They told people my marriage was ending, even though there had never been an affair. They used my work schedule. They used private details about my fertility treatment. Then they used the language of prayer to make their gossip sound compassionate. I did not play all 17 recordings. I played 2. In the first, Brielle said I was working another overnight shift. She said Celeste thought Elliot might appreciate company from someone who understood what he was giving up. The room remained silent after it ended. The second voicemail had been left shortly before my third transfer. Brielle mentioned the exact date. Then she said Raina owed her one and would make sure I finally had time to accept reality. I stopped the recording. My mother lowered her head. Brielle remained still. I told the room that Hawthorne Reproductive Center had confirmed serious violations involving access records documentation and procedural integrity. The Ohio Board of Nursing was investigating. I did not describe the suspected method. I did not claim the interference had been proven to cause the failed cycle. I shared only what Raina had confirmed through her attorney. Brielle had asked whether there was a way to delay my chance of becoming pregnant without making it obvious. Brielle might not have known exactly what Raina would do. She knew enough to ask someone inside my clinic to interfere. I looked around the room. I am not asking this church to choose between 2 daughters. I am asking you to stop using prayer to protect people who refuse accountability. I would not participate in reconciliation that required forgiveness before truth. I would not protect the reputation of people who turned my medical pain into public entertainment. I am not destroying this family. I am ending the version of it that required me to disappear. Celeste stood. She said she had only tried to protect Brielle. I had always been stronger. Brielle had always needed more. She repeated that she had never told anyone to hurt me. Maribel rose from the first row. Saying one child needs less does not mean that child feels less pain. Gideon stood beside her. I used the same excuse for years. It was wrong every time. No one shouted at Celeste. That was what finally took her power. The people who had spent years making excuses for her stopped doing it. Brielle walked down the aisle holding a folded document. It was a copy of her birth certificate. She said Gideon had told her Celeste was pregnant before their wedding. She was not ashamed of how she had been conceived. She was angry that Celeste had spent decades turning her into proof of perfection, and me into the daughter who had to lose. Then Brielle looked at me. I did not know Raina would go that far. You knew enough to ask. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I told her that if she ever wanted me to call her my sister again, her first step was not asking me to protect her from consequences. She needed to tell the truth to her attorney, the nursing board, and Grant. The church board later removed Celeste from her administrator position, the Women's Fellowship leadership team, and access to the mailing list. She was not expelled from church. Elias said, accountability did not require exile, but leadership required trust. Gideon moved into a cottage near Loveland. He did not ask me to repair his marriage. At the end of June, the family court temporarily named Grant the residential parent and legal custodian while the situation was evaluated. Brielle retained weekend parenting time. The ruling was based on a longer history of involving Owen and Lila in adult conflict, not simply the anniversary video. I did not celebrate. I asked Helena to keep the children away from conversations about blame. In July, the Ohio Board of Nursing temporarily suspended Raina's license pending a hearing. Hawthorne agreed to an independent review. Miles Harper was removed from direct control of my complaint. The clinic offered to reimburse the third cycle and cover counseling and legal review. Martin continued negotiating. I had not decided whether to sue. Keeping my legal rights was not revenge. It was refusing to carry the clinic's consequences for them. I slowly returned to full duties at Harborview. During one difficult case, the patient's blood pressure dropped without warning. My hands moved before fear could catch them. I followed the protocol communicated clearly and stabilized the patient. Afterward, Maeve found me washing my hands. How are you? Still here. Elliot and I continued counseling.
There were evenings when silence still sat between us, but it was no longer filled with hidden evidence. Our marriage was not saved because he had remained faithful. Faithfulness had been the minimum. It survived because when I challenged him, he stopped defending his intentions and changed his behavior. In August, we attended a foster to adopt orientation through Hamilton County Children's Services.
Beverly Knox explained the home study training background checks, licensing requirements, and waiting period. She promised nothing. I told her we were not searching for a child to replace IVF. We were asking whether we could become a safe family for a child who needed one. When we returned home, Gideon and Elliot carried the oak high chair in from the garage. This time, I removed the gray cloth myself. I wiped the dust from the top rail. No one said a child would sit there soon. The chair was no longer proof of what my body had failed to do. It was simply an open place in a future no one else had the right to define. I took Elliot's old index card from the drawer. Third time. Whatever the result, I'm still here. Underneath it, I wrote my own line. Different future. No more permission. Still here. I had spent most of my life believing love had to be earned by being useful, quiet, and easy to sacrifice. The chair was still empty. The investigation was not finished. My family was not healed. But for the first time, the space in front of me did not belong to Celeste Brielle or anyone else's judgment. It belonged to a future Elliot and I would choose how to enter. Have you ever been asked to be the bigger person so someone else could avoid accountability? Tell me where you would have drawn the line, and stay with this channel for more stories about women who finally chose themselves.